Okay, welcome to Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79, this week in Geopolitics, part 3. If you haven't watched part 1, you'll understand how the Bitcoin market is leading to a game of shorting the dollar and going long Bitcoin by the administration and the flow of funds from the banks and financial institutions and how they're getting ready for that in a multipolar world. I then went through how tariffs and all the different policies were the execution of the strategic weakening of the dollar and driving people into a world where small businesses and medium businesses get consolidated. The large export countries get consolidated into the same multinational institutions, so they control more of the export games. And then BRICS and GCC and ASEAN, the various other blocks, they go closer in order to create a new growth phase. And then the banks and financial institutions need to infiltrate as much of that so that they can take their export capital that is flowing out through strategically weakening the dollar and creating an environment that's very hard to invest in, and they can invest it in order to gain more strategic control in the new multipolar world that we're going into. Geopolitically, I hope if you're a long-term listener to Bitcoin Hard Talk, you understand how the game works. You have politicians that represent lobby interest. And right now, the most important ones in the geopolitical chessboard of covert control are both Trump and Netanyahu. Trump is mainly represented by the banks and the technocrats. Netanyahu is mainly a pawn for the military-industrial complex. Now, the military-industrial complex and the banks, they invest in each other. And when they launch these wars, if they go wrong, they short the stock as well, so that whatever happens, they make money, through the hedge funds by borrowing from the Bank of Japan and doing the Japan carry trade. So they're able to access unlimited money, and they socialize losses and privatize gains every time the risk gets too high through bailouts and bail-ins and various other things. So Netanyahu is essentially the military-industrial complex that weaponizes religions in order to recruit people to think that when they're being sacrificed to engage in ethnic cleansing, they think they're doing it for the survival of the Jewish people, for example. Or they create covert operations like 9/11 in order to radicalize Christians and Americans into believing that they should go to the Middle East, fight the war for the profits of the military-industrial complex. And then they have agents like Osama bin Laden that's funded through USAID and creates groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And then they say, when you do these things, please pretend it's in the name of Islam so that we can spread propaganda about the religion and we can radicalize people and create the fake war on terror. And then we can start recruiting people through our networks like Facebook so that we can have the people that we can sacrifice and they can fight those wars. And then we have strategic tension between Iran and Israel. We create the whole Jews are fighting for their life narrative. We create the evil terrorist, the caliphate that is trying to expand and implement Sharia law around the world. We create the narrative of Russia's about to expand and take over Europe. We have China's about to reunify with Taiwan, and they're going to colonize the entire world so that they can make trillions and trillions of money from printing money that creates inflation, wipes out your wealth, and it goes back to the military-industrial complex so they can asset strip through the proof of weapons network and consolidate power and wealth into the banks and financial institutions that benefit from it. Now, why are we entering into this new world? Well, under Biden, remember I covered this in previous episodes, 2 games were set up. The game was the CIA would escalate through NATO over to Ukraine. They would use BlackRock in order to get all of the land. They would use UK in order to securitize the financial products via the IMF in order to take over the land. By agitating Russia, completely wipe out Europe by blowing up Nord Stream pipeline and switching off the cheap gas that the manufacturing base requires, and then push them through World Economic Forum into building renewable energy rather than using their nuclear energy, which was a wasted investment. The money went back into the corporations. And then with the recession, you do an open border policy in order to create civil unrest so that you can transition to a surveillance state, change the laws, and arrest people for protesting, to transition to a central bank digital currency, which is due to launch and beta test in October this year in Europe, while America becomes a technocracy. We see what we can get away with in Europe, and then we do the same in America, but we have to put a little bit of entrepreneurship on it. So we'll do the stablecoin technocracy with a social credit score, and we'll make people think that it's different to Europe. Those people are controlled. Those people, we're the capitalists. Those are the socialists and communists, while the same system is happening anyway, just a different mechanism and a different flavor of it. Well, what happened essentially is they did these games. The games was, we'll create October the 7th. I've covered this in previous episodes. Go through Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 76 if you want to go into the detail. But October the 7th was a type of operation that says, right, Saudi is bringing massive power. I went through this in episode 76, so I won't go through it again. The industry is normalizing. America's losing its economic power because of the dollar at the moment, the leverage. Let's put up a game where we decide, are we going to normalize with the old model of military causing forever wars in the Middle East to get profits, or are we going to enter into a new multipolar power structure? Okay, October the 7th is the mechanism. We'll weaponize our USAID media-controlled networks, pretend there was 40 beheaded babies and mass sexual violence. We'll use that in order to radicalize people to justify it, but it didn't work. And then the resistance meant that the Palestinians were not ethnically cleansed. And so Biden failed in his mission to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and strengthen Israel to fulfill the Greater Israel project. And then it backfired because everyone started learning how this stuff really worked. And they deployed agents across X spaces to debate us, tell us all these lies, radicalize people into thinking that it's patriotic, like all of the crazy things that, weaponize the evangelical Christians in order to think that genocide's okay because they need to make sure that the Israelis are on the land, even though they're Europeans and they're not the Semitic people from that land. All of the crazy things that we know is weaponized in order to justify that. And then suddenly the Messiah is going to return and be happy that you committed genocide. And he's going to be happy with that and then eliminate everyone else. And, all of these crazy narratives that are complete extreme interpretations of religious scripture. Right. Well, what happened? So these two wars happened and they were tests. They were beta tests. Would Russia be weakened? And could we take this to World War III and make a load of profit? And will we be able to ethnically cleanse the Palestinian and continue the forever war model that we installed Israel for in the first place, to steal all the oil from the region and create a bunch of vassal states to prop up the petrodollar? Can we continue that model? And so Netanyahu had until the Trump administration to ethnically cleanse. He failed that model. The humanitarian crisis is disgusting. If I'm putting on humanitarian hat, you've been with me through this journey. It's the most horrific experience that I have ever had to go through is watching this in real time. The brutality of what they do to prop up the proof of weapons network can only be described as, and they've been doing it all along, we're just getting to watch it on video now. It can only be described as devilish and demonic. And it's still going on right now. 2 months of weaponizing starvation. And Trump's just signing off on it. All good. So we now know that this is just getting strategic leverage for negotiations, because those were the games. And now Trump came in, he spent, immediately approved a budget, said we're going to have $6 billion of military budget and we'll send $12 billion to Israel, allowed them to rearm and gain as much territory as possible. They started strategically escalating in different regions, humanitarian crisis galore, United Nations veto votes any peace as they have been for decades, and just creating humanitarian crisis after humanitarian crisis in the region, while the GCC essentially are negotiating with America to change the world order, because now the GCC has economic power because their vast reserves are being invested through these very same banks. And the board of Saudi Aramco is the same board member in BlackRock. So the region decided after colonization from the Portuguese, the Brits, the French, the Americans, that war was not going to win until they were more economically powerful. So they normalized and they decided to work with America in order to get access to those dollars, build sovereign wealth through their resources, and wait for the dollar to be strategically weakened, and then use this economic power to actually play the game, the same game, and usher in a new power structure and an alignment with other power structures like BRICS, where China was building the manufacturing base and various other things, and reset the world order so that they don't have to go to World War III and they don't have to be in forever wars. Now, that strategy has worked. And Trump was installed in order to reset the world order into multipolarity. Covered that in terms of what they're doing on the Bitcoin side, short dollar, long Bitcoin in the Bitcoin section, and cover that in part 2 in the macro section. So now all of a sudden, while Trump's saying, we're going to come after the Houthis, you know, he's coming after, he's strong arming everything. We're strong. What is happening in the background? Iran suddenly is now in the 4th week of negotiations with America around a nuclear deal. Remember, the illegal weapons of mass destruction is Israel has them. They stole them and killed JFK and stole them from America. Watch the documentary, go to Rumble, put in Ryan Dawson, NUMEC, N-U-M-E-C. Goes through the exact flow of funds, help you understand who controls the US government and all the networks and the connections to the mafia and the mobs and various other things. It goes through exact names, everything, exactly how it happened. So the weapons of mass destruction was always Israel, but based upon that, they were able to create narratives that made about $7 trillion that cost Americans a lot, but made money for the military industrial complex. Now, suddenly, the deal that Trump tore up, the Iran nuclear deal that Obama negotiated, was suddenly, reversed. And now he's going back into that deal because Iran has gained economic power by joining BRICS and being vital to China's oil supply. And now they were able to circumvent some of the economic effect of those sanctions. And then the de-dollarization movement happened, where BRICS are not, it's not that the countries have to get, remember, with countries, you can be an enemy and an ally at the same time in different areas. That's how geopolitics works. But their job is to make sure that they trade in their own currencies, and billions of dollars is now being done without the dollar. That's the point. So then you can enter into a negotiation with the US in order to gain back your sovereignty. And so immediately, Iran is able to engage in nuclear deal talks again. They resume. Now, this is why we saw Iran allow the axis of resistance to be strategically weakened and not redeployed. This is why there was a change in regime in Assad in Syria, because this was all part of the negotiations. And so the region is being negotiated as we speak, ready for a new growth phase. And we saw all of these games. And this is the first time you've seen these things because the forever wars are ending. And obviously, Israel wants some strategic power. So Israel, you saw news this week around, Jelani, who was previously ISIS. ISIS is a US proxy. Now, he is aligned with Turkey. Remember how the proxies work? They're just militias. It's nothing to do with religion. They're just militias that anyone can rent. Turkey rented them in order to gain some strategic power in Syria. And now Israel and Turkey are in a bit of a battle in order to get strategic negotiations in the new multipolar world order that's being set up. And so US through the Kurds is creating the sanctions deal, which is economically weakening Syria, taking over the oil, taking over the wheat, which is what Syria needs in order to be sovereign. So US is there. Israel is gaining more and more territory. Turkey backed the government. And now Syria, or the Turkey-backed government, comes out and said, we're open to negotiations with Israel. And then Trump is sending as much firepower to Israel, knowing that they are economically decimated because they are a welfare state at this point. Their economy does not work. Like, the bonds are crashing. There's fires happening. Insurance premiums are going up. The migration out of Israel is going in reverse. The government is depleting all of their treasury reserves. Real estate prices are going down. Inflation's becoming a problem because of the constriction. The Houthis, they're not targeting ships. They're only stopping Israel ships getting through. That's creating a hyperinflationary cycle. Those that are economic contributors are leaving. The ones that are in the welfare state are staying. And people know and are protesting that Netanyahu doesn't want to bring back the hostages because he's negotiating not going to prison for crimes against humanity and all the corruption that he's committed. So this is creating real civil unrest, real tension, real problems within the Israeli side, and the economy is just absolutely decimated. And so you have all these games. Now, America's giving because the third largest backer of Trump was Adelson. Adelson wants as much strategic power. Remember the model. The model was America used settler colonialism by weaponizing religion and the jurisdiction in order to create terrorism that would conquer more land and create the civil unrest that would justify the profits for the military-industrial complex and renegotiate real estate deals based upon illegal settlements. And then American construction companies would invest. The Rothschild family were the original investors through those banking networks back in the day. But obviously those companies have been, public and securitized and privatized. So now Saudi, Qatar, and various are able to use the economic game to buy the parts of those companies, get economic influence, and be able to reset the new world order. Now, Israel required America and Europe to be strong. America turned on Europe and sacrificed it through the game that it was playing through NATO and the CIA with the Russian war. And it then escalated the October the 7th operation, and that led to the economic destruction of Israel. The goal was not achieved. And now, because of those negotiations, there is a strategic retreat, a weakening of the dollar, and capital outflows that we covered in the macro section as well. We had an announcement. Iran and Saudi Arabia, the defense minister of Iran and Saudi Arabia issued a public normalization signal and statement saying they are friends. This was the court. Remember what I said years ago? I said China's plan is to normalize between Iran and Saudi Arabia, expel America so that it doesn't create all these covert wars via Israel, and give a Palestinian state and self-determination by overpowering the United Nations. That was the strategy. So we also saw that the United Nations groups that were installed in Iraq from the Iraq war, that gives America the power and their bases, the illegal bases in Iraq and Syria, that were the training camps funded via USAID, in order to create the fake militia groups that pretend to be Muslims, like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and radicalize people through war so that they join those groups to destabilize the region. Now, the United Nations group that was keeping that power construct is starting to leave and negotiate an exit from the region so that Iraq can now stabilize and America can strategically retreat. Turkey and Israel, they're pushing for basically strategic negotiations in Syria to see which one gets more power. The vassal states like Lebanon and various others that Israel's expanding to, they're being fought and they're determining, but Iran's not fighting back via the Axis because Iran has already engaged in the negotiation, the normalization with Saudi Arabia. And the next phase is enrolling right in front of us. Let me get some guesses. My guess is that Netanyahu is being set up for regime change so that America can say, it wasn't us, Israel bribed us, and Netanyahu's a psychopath. He's negotiating, don't send me to war in The Hague. The Genocide Convention has said we committed genocide plausibly. That court case is going to go wrong. I need exile, probably going to get exile in Hungary. That's why Hungary has been doing those strategic negotiations to get more power in the European Union. And basically, the era of unconditional support economically by narrative will still remain, but America can't afford the bill anymore and it's not propping up the petrodollar. So the military industrial complex has lost to the banks. The banks are saying, we don't need Zionism anymore as an ideology to create war. So therefore, we'll dump all the Jewish people that bought into that ideology. Some of them will leave, others will stay, and we'll just return Israel to what it was in the first place. Because Palestine was always a safe place for the Jewish people that wanted to come to Palestine. And it was only when the British and the Zionists and the Rothschilds and the Americans created the environment of using terrorism and militia groups in order to engage in ethnic cleansing and rape, pillage, and steal the territory for oil, as we was covered in World War I from that phase. And so we just return back to what it was before, where those that want to leave, leave. And, you know, the GCC can start reverse colonizing. So the IMF is retreating. About 40% of the investments in the region, across the region, and now GCC funding, the Gulf country funding, rather than IMF. IMF still dominates, but it's getting further and further back as these strategic negotiations. And so by economically annihilating Israel, they get to buy the real estate in distress. Trump's negotiating deals where he gets to co-invest. He's putting up Trump Towers. So Trump gets to give more power to the GCC while giving more power to the strategic negotiations with Israel so they can maximize the amount of financialization and real estate deals that they can do in the rebuild, because they only care about the money. That's what they care about. Now, you know, the GCC are now going to have more power than they've ever had before. This is decolonization. And Israel, it will probably be called Israel and Palestine initially. They'll call it a two-state solution. Trump will probably have a massive announcement saying, I created world peace in the Middle East, while he was just negotiating his own book. But I'll take it. He'll probably be given the Nobel Peace Prize. He'll get to do his narrative, but he'll get a bunch of deals as well. Because economically, they played America at its own game, and the credit card is maxed out. And so now Americans are turning on America by the large institutions and banks that are deciding what the next level of investment is, and they're investing in a strategic weakening of the dollar, but they'll leave a bit of power there because they want their AI hub and they want their robotics empire a little bit there as well. And so now you're seeing strategic normalization between Saudi and Iran and an economically crippled Israel. So what are they going to do with an economically crippled Israel? Well, they're going to buy real estate in distress. They're going to reverse the settler colonialism and do reverse buy the real estate. They'll take over the technology that's been built in Israel. They'll buy those companies in distress because the tariff policy is going to send those small to medium-sized business, and they're not going to get the VC funding. The deal will be you have to take GCC funding through their sovereign wealth. And so they'll be able to gain more and more power through investment. Trump will say, invest in America, foreign direct investment. They'll control parts of the AI and robotics ecosystem, and they'll do the same with China. And they'll sit in the center of the world where they have tax neutral capital markets as they start to do and invest in companies like Binance in order to create stable coins, real world assets, and an environment of a crypto friendly environment. This is an incredibly economically, it's an incredible strategy, and I think it's working, and I think that's what we're seeing. So the Gulf Cooperation Council, which is the GCC countries led by Saudi Arabia, is likely economically acquiring, and then eventually it will probably be an Arab majority, and Christians, Jews, atheists, and Muslims can all live in peace, because naturally that was the state of being before this unnatural force was created to create the profits of the military and to get the oil resources that were needed at the time. So they're gradually returning Palestine to how it was, but they got to do it in a way that seems acceptable to the the Jews in America and the Zionist Christians in America and the Brits and the Europeans as well. And what do they need to do next? The profits move away from the Middle East slowly, but now they need a new economic playground to replace that. So Europe, you get the ECB to print $1 trillion and you make money there. And then you say, how do we infiltrate BRICS? India. Enter India. So now India, which essentially will be taking goods from China and oil from Russia and building up economic power, will be financialized, and it is the third largest purchaser of military equipment from the military industrial complex. So strategically, you create tension because Pakistan was colonized by the US previously. Imran Khan was sent into prison. Colored revolutions happened. Militia groups were funded through this same network for Western IMF interests. And Pakistan was previously a puppet for US agenda. Now, China started investing in this Belt and Road Initiative in order to control more ports. And IMF was strategically slowly weakened. And Belt and Road Initiative via China has now strategic power. So you have the IMF and the Belt and Road Initiative in Pakistan, and you have the military industrial complex that is redeploying its profits into India. And then the banks get to securitize and financialize India and turn it into the next host nation for their economic hitmen, tools. And so strategically, in BRICS, they can use India in order to have these strategic negotiations and try and destabilize the unity, but use that to negotiate as much deals by weakening countries like Pakistan and then buying them in distress through the realms of their dollar debt, weakening and making them vassal states in this new multipolar world order that's being constructed. The US will retreat further because China will benefit from this game. Peace in the Middle East will slowly be something that we start to see based upon these games, and for the first time as possible, because the US is retreating. Because the conflicts were never natural. They never are natural. Like, once you start to recognize this pattern, you'll be a great geopolitical analyst. It took me a long time, but because I've always been a geofinancial analyst, I just follow the money rather than listening. I hope you're starting to understand these patterns and you get to see what they're happening. All of these wars are engineered. The GCC is now economically powerful, and they get to dictate the terms. So Egypt, which is now getting more GCC funding and less IMF funding, is able to set a plan for Palestine to deploy $53 billion of the GCC's money in rebuilding Palestine. And why is this happening? Because essentially, BRICS unified, Russia was able to sell its oil to China. China became an economic power. Through BRICS, India and China normalized, but they have a tension-based relationship while a strategic relationship, because it works for both. India now can be strategically weakened by BlackRock. I'll go through that. But the game was set where the BRICS aligned, the GCC aligned, and Netanyahu lost. It didn't ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. So the US has now lost, and Russia strategically won. Ukraine can't win. And so they're just rinsing a bit more money and making a bit more money out of killing Ukrainians, which is disgusting, but that's how these games work. And just carving up more and more lands and more minerals to America, Russia, and BlackRock. And guess what? America's not going to get any of the deals, as I said. It's all going to be BlackRock, because they're just negotiating for the financial institutions, not for the American people. So US did not ethnically cleanse the Palestinians via their proxy Israel, and via the CIA and via their proxy in Ukraine. They did not defeat Russia, but they did strategically weaken Europe. And now Europe is essentially in the recession, and they get to beta test what they want to do in America. Now, remember, there was an announcement. They're not even hiring. Go to Eric Trump's profile. You can see they're strategically invested. Trump is invested in Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, the GCC. What else is there? They're betting on Bitcoin. We covered that in the Bitcoin strategy. They're shorting the dollar through stable coins and the stablecoin strategy I covered. They can use the Fort Knox audit in order to weaken the dollar if they ever want to create the volatility at the Treasury level. The Fed can decide when to do inflation is transitory in a stagflation environment if they want to redeploy capital flows. And capital already has these new plans. Chaos is no longer the plan, and World War III is no longer the plan. And so basically financially, a new hub is being set, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. Trump, as I said, the region invested $2 billion in Binance. BRICS, ASEAN, and the Global South are going to be the recipients of all this capital. The large multinational financial institutions are going to acquire as many strategic roles up as possible. And meanwhile, the EU and the US are just being asset stripped, and the infrastructure will get worse and worse and worse. But they'll build these hubs of military-industrial complex, big pharma, and banking assets for AI and robotics. But the foreign direct investment will come in from BRICS and GCC, while they vassalize India in order to have a bit of a stronghold, so that they can make sure that they can try and securitize and financialize as much as they can. Essentially, China already won the trade war. This is just the execution. What you're seeing right now is simply the execution. Everything is theatrics. Once you know it, you know it. You can't unsee what you can see. And capital is relocating. Alliances are shifting, and the multipolar world order involves blocks, and for the first time, the removal of the US dollar proof of weapons network from the boot of the countries that are being raped, massacred, and killed through covert wars, the 100 covert wars. Read the book Covert Regime Change. Read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Read the book Operation Gladio. You'll see how these things work, and you'll never see the same again. The empire of the dollar is fading. Now, does that mean you have a big crash of the dollar? No, you do it the same way you did with the British pound. You change the host country, you redeploy capital. This one's slightly different because it was very clear that the pound was going to lose all its gold backing. That went over to the Federal Reserve after World War I and World War II. That operation was executed. You had the strategic weakening of Germany and Russia. All of that gold ended up, all the colonial gold, and then you created the neo-Bretton Woods II system that we covered. Watch Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 78 if you'd like to understand more about Bretton Woods. But you strategically weaken it bit by bit. The pound is still here, but it's a vassal state for extracting value. And so India is the new playground. That's all eyes on India and Pakistan right now. It's essentially being used by the banks and the military-industrial complex in order to retain some influence in this multipolar world order. The only strategy where India wins, by the way, is de-escalation. So the longer this goes on for, the more power that India loses to the military-industrial complex and the banks. So if this carries on for a long time, India is being colonized by the same forces. It will be asset stripped. It will go into growth. They'll use it for confiscation of wealth from the middle class. They'll take all the gold from the savers, and eventually they'll give it the same destiny through the Central Bank of India, and it will be asset stripped and owned by BRICS eventually for the countries that hold on to their central banks and the countries that use their resources for the people rather than privatizing them, and then has capitalism in order to distribute capital, but based upon sound money and hard money. And in multipolarity, everyone can go onto a Bitcoin standard if they choose as well. But there's a lot of gold in India to extract from the people. And it's a real easy one to turn into civil unrest. And so the longer this goes on for, the more weaker India will be, the more weaker Pakistan will be. The tensions within Pakistan only really benefit either the US or and by US, it's not the US. It means the private corporations, they're going to rebuild and fund Pakistan and Kashmir in order to take advantage of some of those routes. But India, the longer this goes on for, the more infiltration and the more securitization and the more financialization, and the more it will be used as a vassal state for military industrial complex and banks. China, it continues to strengthen. And the weaker Pakistan gets, the more it will be either driven to China as US strategically retreats, and China gets to rebuild that and have more control of those strategic routes. It's essentially a standoff. And so, the Pakistan leadership came out and admitted, we've been doing the bidding for the American empire and the British Empire for 30 years. All of this fake terrorism was funded by you. And we were essentially America's bitch in order to create destabilization and create this fake narratives around propping up the poppy seed fields that the CIA uses in order to get Americans addicted to drugs through the poppy seeds in Afghanistan. And so you have the Afghanistan and Pakistani tension. It was all America using those resources through its covert colonization. And you can strategically weaken India so that they gain more control as well in this new BRICS multipolar world. So basically, that's the multipolar world order that we are seeing right now. Large multinational corporations in America will acquire all the medium-sized business, a transfer of wealth from Main Street to Wall Street. The Asian export-dependent countries, they'll be asset stripped into those banks and financial institutions and large corporations. The countries that have sovereign wealth and their own central bank will be able to build power and become the acquirers by partnering with capital and hopefully remain more sovereign. But the BRICS will be able to invest in, they'll have their own payment networks, their own currencies for more and more trade. GCC will have the same. And they will all choose in an environment where people don't trust their currencies. I think it's a Bitcoin story. I covered the Bitcoin story in part 1. Strategically, they'll be acquiring gold, and that gold will be asset stripped by the countries that allow themselves to have the banks and military industrial complex in their countries. And let's not forget about the $50 billion from India's diaspora that live in the GCC countries. They can use that in order to gain some more economic power as well. And basically, China, that is leading BRICS through their economic strength, and Saudi Arabia, that is leading the GCC, they can tighten their economic partnerships, and the new multipolar world order is being set, and Trump is there to deliver it for you. It's a losing game for India the longer it goes on for. And Trump is now effectively 100% aligned, not with America, not with MAGA, but the BRICS aligned banking side. And the military industrial complex is getting ready to dump Netanyahu because the GCC has more power and they're not going into World War III. And so they can now use India as the vassal state in order to enter into this multipolar world order. And tariffs were the mechanism for making it happen. Trump was the messenger. Make America great again was the narrative to make it acceptable to the American people. And the deals that are all being done, the real goal is to asset strip all of the assets from America, just like is happening to Europe right now at the expense of the Europeans, at the expense of the British people, and at the expense of the Americans, while everything is moving exactly as I predicted, and they called conspiracy theories from people that were listening to Bitcoin Hard Talk throughout this whole thing. Never, ever listen to what the media says that is controlled by Operation Mockingbird and the intelligence agencies. Never listen to what the politicians say that are controlled by big pharma, big banks, big tech, and military. The story is always what they're doing with their money and what money flows and capital. It is not being destroyed. It is simply being redeployed. So you need to follow the money rather than being caught in a narrative. Trump, he's positioned to profit from all of this. Elon, profit from all of this. Lutnick, profit from all of this. Bessent, profit from all of this. Marco Rubio, profit from all of this. Steve Witkoff, profit from all of this. That's why billionaires are politicians, because they want to become multi-billionaires, and you have to pay it because it's going to come from you. The growth won't be there. It's going to come from you. And that's what they're doing. I'm sorry they lied to you. And don't see this as just an attack on Trump. It's systemically how the system works. And the sooner you recognize it, the sooner you realize that your job is to gain economic power by accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible. And if you look where Trump is investing, he's investing in Saudi, he's investing in UAE, he's investing in Turkey, he's investing in China. He's got a $2 billion fund with Harry Kushner that is fully funded by Saudi. And Trump towers are popping up all over China funded by the largest bank in China, ICBC. Chinese trademarks, since he's been in the Trump administration, are popping up all around during his presidency. And now he's investing across all of the different parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem. He's launching his own stable coin to go short the dollar to get the money to buy the Bitcoin, just like Tether. And he is preparing to profit off Americans with his crony capitalist partners, pretending that as America goes deeper and deeper into a universal basic income, that his stable coin is the one that has the patriotism. But he will be using it in order to get as much Bitcoin as possible. And when they want to strategically crash it, when they want the dollar to be weaponized in order to change and reset the order to the exact mix, they'll pretend that Jerome Powell is looking after inflation. And all you need to do is prepare. The world is not ending. The world is only ending if you're listening to the narrative in your patriotic version of the world. The world is being restructured. There's no stopping it. Follow the money and protect yourself by becoming self-sovereign. And self-sovereign comes from us using the experiment of Bitcoin and decentralized money to build as much economic power, because that is exactly what others are doing. And you need to play them at your own game. We need to learn from what happened with the BRICS and the GCC. The GCC reversed colonization, reversed the IMF effect, because they beat them at their own game. And that was the only way they were able to be free. So what can we learn from that? Your job is to use fiat currency to get as much Bitcoin as possible for as long as possible, and recognize that the world is changing, because that's where economic freedom and sovereignty lives. Don't listen to politicians. Don't get patriotic towards them. So always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. Some are going to get hurt. Others are going to get wrecked. Those that build Bitcoin economic power are going to be the ones that are on the right side, and you're going to be able to help your family. I believe that you'll be able to do it with peace, love, and unity, and you'll be able to avoid the universal basic income, economic dependency, as we usher in this world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. We're going to do it with peace, love, and unity. Others, unfortunately, will be on the wrong side of the psyop, and they may end up in violence. And that's what we need to do. We need to recognize that we're in a battle between decentralization and centralization, and Bitcoin has proved the decentralized model, and we need to do that with more and more and more. We'll share the whole journey together. And don't forget, if you would like to see some of those old videos, make sure you join the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal for free. Later next year, I'm going to be doing the latest proxy Great Depression of the 2020's video series as a follow-up from my 2009 one and my 2019 one. And you'll be the first to get notified about that if you are a free member of the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. That's everything we're going to cover for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 79 on the new multipolar world order, MWO. Remember, if you start to see other people cover MWO, ask them to credit it to me, because many people are sharing this content, and I personally prefer it if you share my content and credit me, but actually getting the message out there is enough as well. They'll repackage the information, but remember who got you ahead of the curve. Remember who they were calling conspiracy theorists, and remember when they say, yeah, that was obvious, Simon, remember who got you ahead of the curve. So please help me. Please like, share, subscribe. Please join the Bitcoin Hard Talk free membership portal, and I'll keep giving as long as I got, for as long as I can talk, because I want as many people to do this in the peaceful transition. So join me on simondixon.com, hit that yellow button, and you can get your free membership, and I'll notify you every time information comes live, and I'll see you next week for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 80. Peace.